Hello and welcome to the Untitled Anarchist Seagull channel. I'm your host and Untitled Anarchist Seagull called Elise. Hey Adam, how you doing? And I'm sure everyone heard that everybody wanted to hear from on the subject of genocide in Palestine, the people that everyone just would love to hear from on the subject of genocide, they've decided to intervene as third parties in the World Court proceedings. Yes, that's right. Germany have decided that there can't be a discussion about genocide without them, with all their practical experience in the subject, objecting to the way their intellectual property is being used. Hello, River Rune. And deshalb möchte ich erstmal mir namens und im gefühlten Auftrag eines immer größer werdenden Teils des Judentums an die Bundesregierung folgende Stellungnahme abgeben. Deutschland halt's Maul! Echt jetzt? Wer von euch ist auf die Idee gekommen, dass sich irgendjemand dafür interessiert, was für High-Level-Gedanken ihr zum Thema Völkermord gefasst habt aufgrund eurer praktischen Erfahrung? Keiner will das hören. Ihr habt ein Recht erworben durch eure blutige Geschichte, und zwar das Recht, das Stillschweigen zu bewahren, sprich die Klappe zu halten. Ende der Durchsage. Okay, so, yes. Hey, River Rune, just thought I would just throw that in there, just in case the German federal government should ever look at this stream, which I'm sure they just love to. I think German federal government's always loves to watch my stuff. I'm sure. Basically, just see the Anti-Deutsche, which I imagine at least some of you have heard of. These people who think they're communists. Except their big thing is that they are really pro-Israel and pro-US. And so they call themselves anti-Germans. Because, of course, because they take the exact same position as the German government, so obviously they're anti-Germans. And one of their slogans over the years has been Deutschland halt's Maul, which translates as Germany STFU, basically. And now the entire world has that slogan has caught on worldwide. I mean, Namibia, one of the various countries where Germany has committed genocide in the past, say, 120 odd years, they issued an official statement saying, "What the fuck do you think you're doing? Who the fuck do you think you are, Germany? You only just acknowledged the genocide that you did on the Nama and the Herero a year and a half ago. Still haven't really done any real reparations for it, and you're gonna fucking act like an authority on the subject of genocide just because you fucking do it often?" Or words to that effect. Yeah, I mean, we all were just dying to hear what Germany had to say about this, because they just have such good takes. They're always just firmly on the wrong side of history on this sort of thing. And you're probably doing okay if you take whatever Germany's take on the subject is, and then just do the opposite. So, I'm just looking at our little options here. And now, yesterday we were looking at the quad, trying to have a go at the squad. We also have, let's see, Israel faces the international lynch mob from the Texan Zionist Carolyn Glick. There's also, I've got the live recording of Israel's oral arguments where they attempt to explain away all the really masterful presentation that that South Africa put on. We've got, as Israel fights on 7 fronts, the U.S. signals it's on its own. You know, except for all the fucking weapons and the fact that the U.S. has started a war against Yemen, in order to allow Israel to commit genocide unhindered. Well, allow itself and Israel to commit genocide unhindered. So, I mean, there are a number of options here. And as always, I'm quite interested. Does chat have any thoughts on the subject? I mean, there's also the best vindaloo recipe, which shouldn't be in there. That was meant to go into watch later, but I'm so used to saving things to reaction fodder that I put it there instead. So there is like the best vindaloo recipe as well, which I haven't watched it yet still, because all I seem to do with that video is comment on how I put it in the wrong place. So I don't know for sure whether it is in fact the best vindaloo recipe, but so I guess there's also that. So any thoughts? Any preferences? Well, I'll link you. Hey, if you're interested in Vindaloo, here, I'll drop you the link in chat. Here, here is what may possibly be the best Vindaloo recipe. I don't know. I haven't tried it, but I mean the picture looks nice, so it's like the best Vindaloo photography at least. There you go. Okay. I think we might start with Carolyn Glick having a normal one on the World Court proceedings and just see how that goes from there. What's everyone think? Okay. Oh, just hurry up and load, damn it. Bad enough that it's going to be Carolyn Glick in this video without...
3 months after Israel was subjected to a one-day genocide on October 7th, Israel is...
That's not what a genocide is. And let me just note that at this point, yeah, there is absolutely no responsible person can actually continue to make the claims that Israel made about what happened on October 7th between the, because I mean the Israeli media have been the ones to really just tear into a lot of these claims and show that actually the Israeli military did. Yeah, their episodes, I mean, they bring a special kind of energy. Oh, and here we go. Here's the Israeli solution. And you'll notice this map, you know, yeah, no, there's no Palestine on it, and it also is taking a chunk out of there. It's also annexing part of Syria and part of Lebanon. So, I mean, yeah, these are obviously people who can complain about the idea of a one-state solution.
on trial for genocide. I'll have all the details and some takeaways from this travesty coming up on In Focus.
Well, the Texan Zionists on the case.
On October 7th, Israel suffered a day of genocide. It was a...
No, it didn't. Like, literally, that's not what genocide is. I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone in chat probably knows this. At least everybody who's, like, active in chat, I'm fairly certain. But the way genocide works, it's... The key element to it is the intent. And the intent has to be the intent to destroy a national, racial, ethnic, or religious group in whole or in part. And then there are like one of, I think, 7 acts that have to be committed with that requisite intent. Like, the fucking uprising on October 7th does not qualify by any fucking stretch of the imagination. And you don't get to call October 7th a genocide and then act all precious when people call your client murdering 30,000 people so far and openly saying they want to collect the entire set. You don't get to act precious about that. A day of genocide. Fuck off.
The one-day Holocaust is
What the fuck did she just say?
suffered a day of genocide. It was a one-day Holocaust.
No, it fucking wasn't. You know how I know it fucking wasn't? Because there was no fucking genocide. There weren't any fucking death camps. It was, I mean, like, literally, to believe that these things are comparable, you have to accept that Ernst Zündel and other Nazi Holocaust deniers, you have to hand it to them. Because to even suggest that this is comparable is to trivialize the Holocaust to that degree. Like, imagine if somebody, like, I'm sure if we go through Carolyn Glick's video archive, we'll find her getting angry about the fact that, sometimes people compare specific things that Israel did that are like what the Nazis did, like specific things the Nazis did, to specific things the Nazis did that were comparable to what the Israel did. And she'll say it's all anti-Semitic, but she's going to trivialize the Nazi Holocaust to this degree. And that's not it. That's somehow not anti-Semitic.
As Hamas, supported by thousands of civilians from Gaza, came in by the thousands into southern Israel and invaded our communities, our
you'll find that they were their communities first, actually.
Military bases, and they simply slaughtered, massacred in a sadistic way.
Yeah, there's no evidence of that. And also, one of the ways that I know that it wasn't a one-day genocide and it wasn't comparable to the Holocaust is that the first places they targeted were fucking military bases. Now, the fact that your fucking military is that incompetent that they could not handle a prison break does not change the fact that the people the Nazis were killing, one of the things they didn't have? Fucking military bases. They didn't have a fucking army. Usually that is a talking point Zionists like to use. But for these purposes, apparently we're supposed to pretend that that what the Nazis did was just attack Jewish military bases that didn't exist.
1,200 men, women, and children.
Oh, well, at least she left off those 200 that Israel tacked on, despite the fact that they later had to admit that Israel actually burned them to death.
In their beds. They burned them alive.
There's no evidence of that.
They committed mass rape.
There's literally no evidence of that. Literally nobody. I mean, obviously, content warning. I should have said it earlier on this. But, I mean, literally nobody has come forward and says this happened to them. It is, I mean, an absolute... This is just Der Stürmer grade propaganda. This is the sort of thing that Der Stürmer like to say about Jews all the time, in order to incite genocide against them.
Of young Israeli women.
That's
a lie. Beheaded children.
No, they didn't. Like, I mean, she has no excuse at this point. She's in Israel. In Israel is where this stuff has been debunked first. I mean, Electronic Intifada have the claim to being the first English language outlet to really cover this. But, I mean, a lot of what they covered was stuff that was already being covered in Hebrew, and what they did was they translated it and they looked into it further. Like, I mean, she has absolutely no excuse. She cannot actually claim that she believes this in good faith because the media in the place where she is uh have comprehensively debunked every one of these claims.
Small children, babies, as well as men and women,
That's a
and
lie.
otherwise committed atrocities and crimes against humanity.
No, that's also the crimes against humanity. She's a fucking lawyer, I should note. She almost certainly, I mean, she almost certainly does actually know the definition of crimes against humanity because I mean, she's a lawyer for she was a military lawyer for Israel, and they're involved in so many crimes against humanity. They probably do have to check the definition from time to time because the UN has repeatedly documented them committing them and pointed out that they are crimes against humanity. But I mean, even if the things that she's describing were true, they do not actually fit that fucking definition. And the thing is, what I cannot stress enough, that the things she is saying, there is literally no evidence to support them.
That answer the definition of genocide is put.
Oh, River Rune with the memory. Yes, she is a fucking Notre Dame truther. She actually thinks that the Palestinian world conspiracy is the reason that Notre Dame caught fire. That's right. I had forgotten all about that. Like, that was so wild, my brain was like, no, I refuse to believe that this is a thing that people believe.
Forth by the genocide
And also, she works for, she's connected to Breitbart. So, I mean, that's how you know that this is some real journalism.
convention. And this was the consensus view, obviously, in Israel, but also in.
No, it wasn't. I mean, like, literally, it was not the consensus view because the Israeli media have been tearing that to shreds, that entire fucking narrative.
Many of the leading nations in the world. And yet here we have 3 months later, it is not Hamas or the Palestinians as a society who support this that are being tried for genocide.
Because, like, I mean, she's just here to Davo Olavo. I mean, fucking hell. Like, of course they're not being, because they're the fucking victims of it. Like, I mean, are you gonna mention how many of them, the people you do propaganda for, have killed? Perhaps compare that to the numbers that you were, like, throwing around a minute ago? And even the 1,200 figure she mentions, of course, it's not clear how many, because there's no proper investigation officially going into it, and Israel is actually systematically destroying the forensic evidence by burying it, literally burying it. They've even buried the fucking cars. So, I mean, nobody's going to get any usable forensics off of any of that shit. And they've also refused to allow a full investigation of their claims of SA. But, like,
in the International Court of Justice at The Hague. No, it's the state of Israel. It's the victim of.
No, it isn't the fucking victim. You're not the fucking victims. Like, seriously.
This genocide. And the side bringing the case against Israel is South Africa. And, you know, what.
And that has to sting because South Africa, you know, back in the old days, used to be one of Israel's best friends. I mean, they must feel so fucking betrayed that South Africa isn't there alongside them the way they were when South Africa needed somebody to pretend that Bophuthatswana was an actual country.
When we think about South Africa, when most people in the West think about South Africa, when most people in Israel think about South Africa, we think about the heroic fight against the apartheid regime since the 1960s, really.
Yeah, the apartheid regime that Israel armed on behalf of the United States.
Until the fall of the apartheid regime in 1991. But
Actually,
that's not
1994.
South Africa today. South Africa today is an economic basket case.
So, like, okay. Leaving aside the fact that when you actually, I mean, that's such a wild thing to start with. Like, I don't even kind of know what the fuck to do with that. Because, of course, the so-called Union of South Africa managed to make their economic statistics look good because they literally took all of the indigenous population that they were systematically impoverishing, locked them away in fucking fake ass homelands, and called them a different country. So they literally were, I mean, apart from everything else, that's a great statistical manipulation if you want to reduce your poverty rate. Um, but yeah. So who gives a shit if their economic situation sucks? Yes, their economic situation sucks. And let me just get ahead of something. Yeah, I mean, there is actually an accusation of hypocrisy that can be made by people who are not actually propagandists for a genocidal apartheid regime, because South Africa hasn't done shit for the Tigray people who are being genocided in Ethiopia, I mean, amongst other things. So, I mean, and so I feel obligated to point that out. There are valid accusations against the current South African government, and it's worth noting that actually, one of the most powerful oral statements given during the oral observations on by South Africa was given by actually a guy who has appeared for the Economic Freedom Fighters, who definitely aren't fans of the ruling ANC. That's Tembega Nkugaitobi. Who, I mean, just in a perfectly accurate display of North American whiteness, the presiding judge of the fucking World Court didn't even try to pronounce his surname correctly. But okay, so you can't listen to South Africa on genocide because their economy's bad, apparently.
But aside from that, it's been run by the corrupt African National Congress Party.
Yeah. I mean, yes, but yes, there's a lot of fucking corruption. I mean, and Western business interests have like completely captured the state. But the thing about that is, you don't when you're like prepping one of the South African apartheid regime's closest allies, you don't get to complain about how corrupt the ANC are.
Since the end of the apartheid regime and over the years, rather than reforming, rather than caring about South Africa and bringing the treasures of that land, the natural resources of that land to bear and bring prosperity to all South Africans.
So what she's saying here, I guess, is that what she'd really like is for the Palestinians to take all the treasures of Palestine and bring them to bear for all for the Palestinian people. Then, like, I mean, is she actually this fucking Breitbart drone? Is she actually here going to argue that South Africa ought to be social democratic when she like opposes that anywhere else?
The
I
ANC,
mean, yeah. Like, I mean, yeah, yeah, that's what she's talking about is economic decolonization, which she very conveniently does supports in this one case. But also, who gives a shit? What does this have to do with the fact that you're repping a country that's doing genocide?
has ground that poor country into the ground.
Yeah, I mean, because yeah, South Africa was in such great shape during apartheid. I mean, it was in such great shape. I mean, Israel loved them. Like, I mean, is she gonna do some white genocide shit? Is she gonna do a Vosh?
By carrying out Zimbabwean economic policies that have impoverished the people of South Africa.
No, they haven't. I mean, okay, yes, there was some very modest land reform. But for the most part, what they've done has just been straight up neoliberalism, and that has been the problem. Oh, I see. I mean, like, can you get a fact right, Caroline? Like, one fact?
Wrecked the education system of South Africa, wrecked
Compared to what? Wrecked it compared to what? Like, what? Compared to the fucking Bantu Education Act? Which was specifically designed to ensure that indigenous people in South Africa were just literate enough to do menial work, but not literate enough that they could, like, literally, this is the stated justification. Like, the authors of the act said the idea was to ensure that they could do, like, menial work, but could not aspire to anything higher because they considered the number of indigenous people in higher education to be a threat. So, like, what the fuck is she comparing their educational system to? And why the hell are we talking about any of this? We're talking about your genocide.
Health system of South Africa and enriched the leaders of the ANC. In the meantime, the ANC, which historically was allied with the PLO, terrorist organization, because they were part of the Soviet-led anti-American groupings in the third world.
I wonder why why the fucking ANC would have been anti-US. Could that have been because the EUS was pro-apartheid? Like it is now still?
As they can, they've always been supportive of the Palestinians, and that was sort of taken as a given because, of course, Israel also had a short period where it was working with the South African government.
Yeah, short period. That's cute. Let me just see, like, Israel-South Africa relations, because it was not a short period. Okay. Yeah. I mean, so a short period of 20 years. What happened is, briefly, Israel, in just an amazing show of fucking chutzpah. Oh, well, wait a second. Okay, that's the citation needed. So, yeah, I mean, Israel has actually had a very long fucking relationship with the apartheid regime in South Africa. And were responsible, amongst other things, for helping them get their nuclear weapons program off the ground.
And the apartheid regime in the 1970s. And it's always singled out for...
And the 80s. Don't forget the 80s.
Actions of cooperation with the apartheid regime during the 1970s, even though Israel's cooperation with the apartheid regime of South Africa was far smaller and far less significant than the interactions that the apartheid regime had with the United States.
Yeah, because Israel is smaller and less significant than the United States. Israel is the U.S.'s fucking scrotum. Okay? Israel is nothing. Literally, there's no such thing as Israeli capital. If you actually, economic researchers have looked into this. There is so much overlap in capital between the U.S. and Israel. There is no line that can be drawn. So yeah, of course the fucking apartheid regime is going to have more relations with the boss in Washington than with fucking Israel. Israel was there as a go-between half the time, especially because at a certain point the U.S. wanted to appear to be a little bit at arm's length.
Britain, with European countries, with Arab countries, really with all countries of the world, and yet for some reason, guess what it is?
Well, just because Israel was the only country in the world to offer to give Bophuthatswana a fake embassy, just because they were providing nuclear weapons and the Israeli leadership pointed out that they had deep ideological ties because they too had an apartheid regime.
It's Israel that's always singled out for having had ties with the apartheid regime during the 1970s.
And 80s. Don't forget the 80s.
That's the way it is, and that's just the way it is. That's the way that things go, and that's the way that things always go. So one of the first foreign leaders that Nelson Mandela met when he got out of prison was none other than PLO chief architect of modern terrorism, Yasser Arafat. So we already, from the outset of the post-apartheid regime, despite
I
Israel's
mean, it's funny. She's like acting like, oh, Israel did have never really had all that much to do with with apartheid South Africa. Oh, by the way, let's talk about just how based things were in apartheid South Africa and how the place is a shithole ever since there's no apartheid there. Not that we're like pro apartheid or anything, but it's just like, I mean, wow, this is her lead in. The idea is that we're supposed to forget that this is supposedly about the fact that there are ongoing court proceedings about the genocide.
best efforts and true, authentic, heartfelt greeting and desire to cultivate warm ties with the new South Africa, we were shunned. And over the years,
Well,
the
yeah,
ANC has sort of been divided between.
yeah, of course you were, like because you're a fucking apartheid regime. And you supported you supported the people who were torturing and murdering the people who were in the current government. People have a long memory about that sort of thing, it turns out, Caroline.
The wing that supports the PLO and the wing that supports the Hamas. And so today you have the ANC-led government of South Africa is led by President Cyril Ramaphosa.
Yeah, I mean, keeping it classy, didn't bother to check his name. That when you see an H after a consonant in an isiZulu or isiXhosa name, okay, this is just a pro tip here. Um, that does not make like ph is not f, it's p. It creates aspiration because when you have a p in between vowels or a K in between vowels in isiZulu, isiXhosa, that becomes softened and voiced. When you have that H, it remains unvoiced. So it's Ramaphosa. Ramaphosa. Yeah, I mean, really, really sort of backhanded, very cute apartheid apologia. Where it's like, oh yeah, we didn't really want to have anything to do with the apartheid regime. Oh, by the way, so let me. I was just talking about how actually things were so much better then.
And he is sort of the, I don't know, non-Hamas, pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel group. They're all very, very anti-Israel and oppose the existence of the state of Israel, which we'll get to in a second. But
I
his
wonder why people who are against apartheid in one country would be against it in other places.
rival in the ANC is Foreign Minister Nalita Pandor. Nalita Pandor is very representative of the radical Muslim.
Naledi, Naledi Pandor, nay Matthews. God, I mean, not Nalita. Jesus Christ. I mean, she's just. It's like, just kind of reminding us all that she's a big racist. Can't even bother to check these people's names.
Um, membership of the ANC. But really, I haven't noticed that they haven't been operating in harmony. I think that
Well, yeah. Then, so what you would just say? Wait. So they're rival wings, and of course, all ANC politics is based on a rivalry over which Palestinian faction people support, apparently. Except she hasn't noticed that they aren't working in harmony. So what she's saying is that whole thing she just talked about setting up the rival wings was, what's the word? Bullshit?
before we even go to what's happening at the International Court of Justice, where Israel is being
What do we
accused of
get to?
genocide when it is the victim of a genocidal
Fuck you.
population that launched a genocide against it on October 7th.
Notice what she's doing there. She is specifically saying that the population launched a genocide. That is genocidal incitement right there. Because she is doing exactly, I mean, and this is the whole thing that, this was if you haven't watched, I mean, let me say, I mean, all the fucking content warnings in the world, it is hard to watch. It is traumatic viewing because they really get into it and they are extremely detailed. But if you check out Tembega Nkugai Toby's oral observations, he specifically goes into how on all levels there is coordinated messaging to say that the civilian population needs to die. And what she's doing right there, where she does not say that it's Hamas, she doesn't say that it's a particular faction doing it. She specifically just said right there, and it's not the first time she said it in these 6 minutes, that it was the entire population. Like, literally, this is exactly the kind of genocidal incitement we're talking about here.
It's important to pay attention to what Nalita Pandor and Ramaphosa have done since October 6th.
Oh, well, she got Ramaphosa's name right. Kind of, almost. But not Naledi, Naledi, Naledi.
Pandor spoke...
I'm learning isiZulu on and off. Ngifunda isiZulu, kodwa angikhulumi kakhulu. I'm learning isiZulu, but I can't say a whole lot.
With Ismail Haniyeh, Hamas leader, on October 18th. So just a week and a half after the invasion of Israel, the mass slaughter of Jews, the largest day of killing Jews since...
Oh, God, shut the fuck up. Like, I mean, I'm really sick of this bullshit where they try to say, oh, the largest day of killing Jews since the Holocaust. It's like, that doesn't... First of all, I mean, at this point, the numbers need to be seriously revised because it turns out the fucking Israeli military was responsible for, at the very least, a significant number of those deaths. And, I mean, the words that have been used in the Israeli media by people who are saying that there doesn't need to be an investigation, they're saying that the number of killings of Israelis by the Israeli military is too immense to investigate. That is a quote from Yediot Acharonot. The EI had it in one of their articles on the subject. But, like, that, I mean, they're just trying to find so many different ways to just liken what is a fucking ghetto uprising to the Nazis. It is deeply fucked up. It is Holocaust denial.
The Holocaust, Pandor thought the most appropriate thing was to speak on the telephone with Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. She also visited Iran, which of course is Hamas's state sponsor. It's a country, it's a regime.
Oh, Iran's a country. Did you know that? I'm glad she cleared that up. Got a tickle in my throat.
That has a lot of economic and other ties, including military ties with South Africa, which is a member of the BRICS economic grouping.
Which, by the way, just to get ahead of this, BRICS isn't really a meaningful economic grouping. Like, Wall Street is heavily invested in BRICS. That should tell you just how fucking independent that is.
And so Pandor spoke with Ismail Haniyeh. She visited Iran. And that's not all she did. During that conversation...
Who gives a shit?
With Ismail Haniyeh, and this was before Israel even launched its ground operation. She accused Israel of genocide.
You mean, well, because by that time, Netanyahu, Herzog, and Gallant had all stated that they intended to exterminate the population of the Gaza Strip.
She said that we had to worry about humanitarian assistance to Gaza. And just to be clear, on October 6th, and really even on October 7th, it was business as usual in Gaza. Israel wasn't doing anything.
No, that's bullshit, actually. I mean, Israel was maintaining the same... I mean, it was business as usual, because Israel was maintaining the same siege by sea, air, and land that it had for 17 years, that was actually allowing an unsurvivable amount of calories per person to get into the Gaza Strip that had to be supplemented by smuggling through the tunnels that they're trying to destroy, but they still can't find them, is the thing. They can't find the tunnels. They don't know where the entrances are. But so yeah, I mean, it was a walled ghetto that the people were being systematically killed by starvation and disease in.
To Gaza. We weren't at war with Gaza. The war
Oh
began
no, you were occupying Gaza.
when the Gazans, led by their regime, Hamas,
The Gazans, led by their Palestinians. Gaza is part of the occupied Palestinian territory.
the popular regime, Hamas, invaded Israeli territory and again carried out a day of genocide again.
See, Israel does not recognize any of these boundaries. It's funny, you can't really claim that you've been invaded when you don't actually have declared boundaries. Israel has refused all along to openly state what boundaries they claim, because they keep on expanding it.
Against the Jews of Israel, killing 1,200, taking 246 hostage, and wounding thousands more that day.
Yeah, and those numbers, again, are nonsense on a number of levels. With regard to the hostages, it's worth noting that, see, when the wall came down and people were able to just get out of the ghetto, nobody was actually, like, stopping people from just coming out. So, I mean, what like, Hamas spokespeople have said happened is a lot of, just random civilians came out, and a lot of them actually ended up just sort of taking people back with them. The Qassam Brigade's objective, according to their spokespeople, was actually to take military personnel prisoner, which in fact they did. They took a bunch of actually very senior members of the Gaza Brigade back with them. But then they found but then they found out that all sorts of people had taken, who were not affiliated with them, had taken civilians. And they've had offers on the table to return all of those civilians from the very start as part of a hostage exchange.
And that means that on October 18th, to the extent that...
Okay, October 18th. Gaza death toll by 18 October. Okay. 3,500 people had already been murdered by October 18th. Now, to put that in perspective, the total number of Palestinians Israel had murdered between 2000 and 2023 was 3,000. And in a week, they managed to double that. Actually, they apparently do not. They have orders not to go down into the tunnels if they ever do find them.
Trade in and out, egress and exit from Gaza was limited by the fact that they had just gone to war against Israel. It had only been suffering for a week.
Well, yeah, I mean, a week and 17 years, and then the occupation before that, which wasn't great either, and was systematically trying to destroy the local economy.
So it wasn't that there were mass shortages after...
Yes, there fucking were.
For a week?
I mean, there were mass shortages before a week. And remember, what she's leaving out is that the Israel openly announced that they were going to cut off all food, all water, all fuel, and all medicine. Normally, they were getting, and totally inadequate, roughly 500 truckloads of supplies a day, humanitarian supplies. And that was never enough, because Israel keeps a lot of stuff out. Like fresh food, they're not allowed to have. If they want fresh food, it has to be smuggled in from Egypt. Like fresh fruit and veg and stuff like that. So, and that had already been, so they'd gone a week without the basic survival supplies. So yeah, they were in fact, they had shortages on the fucking 6th of October, and it was really bad by then, by the 18th, especially because they had no fucking electricity and no running water.
But she said that people were starving in Gaza. She said that that we have to bring
Yes!
humanitarian assistance to prevent mass starvation
They
in
were.
Gaza. You see,
They
so
still are.
this was 5 minutes after the war. She's already saying that, you have a humanitarian disaster in Israel, that Israel is carrying out genocide. She also
Well, yeah, because Israel said they were carrying out genocide.
said that the civilians that were murdered on October 7th were all soldiers.
Citation needed.
Um, she said that that Hamas murdered 1,000. At that time, we thought it was 1,400, and the death toll went.
It's worth noting that Israel did not actually release the full information of the people who died between the 7th and the 9th for weeks after. Like, I was following, Haaretz had this, like, running count of the names of the people whose names, who died, whose names were cleared for release. Haaretz never explained what the criteria for it being cleared for release were. But, I mean, it was well over a month before the number of actual openly, publicly acknowledged names made it up to 1,000. So at that time, there was every reason, it's worth noting, there's, like, every reason to doubt. Like, at that time, the number, I remember looking at their, they allowed you to sort of categorize it by by military or civilian or emergency services, cops or whatever. And it was, like, roughly, for a while there were more military names than there were civilian names.
Down to 1,200 subsequently when they identified more hostages in Gaza that had been.
No, that's not what happened. I mean, Mark Regev does not actually accidentally admitted what actually happened, which was that there were 200 people, he said, who were burned so badly they thought they were Israelis, and it turned out they were Hamas.
Been taken. So you had at that time.
When she said that's just
1,400 assumed fatalities, and she said that Hamas had killed 1,400 soldiers and settlers, as in they weren't innocent civilians, they didn't deserve to live. It wasn't a war crime what Hamas did.
So, okay, but you're saying, because you're the better person, that the civilian population of Gaza does deserve to live? I mean, because you haven't been saying that so far, but you're trying to find some moral high ground, I sense.
She called for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to be prosecuted by the International Court of Justice.
Probably she means the International Criminal Court, because the International Court of Justice doesn't do prosecutions. And by that time, Netanyahu had repeatedly said that he wanted to exterminate the entire civilian population of Gaza. So yeah, prosecution would have been appropriate. In fact, he'd already committed crimes against humanity that could have sent him to prison for life if the rule of law existed. Be by October 6th already.
For war crimes. This was right after the massacre. Suddenly, Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel was guilty of war crimes, but Hamas.
Yeah, suddenly. I mean, admittedly, yes, he was guilty of war crimes on the 6th of October. But, apparently you can't commit a war crime within 11 days of starting a genocide. Like, there's a cooling off period.
This isn't, because the victims of Hamas, according to what she said, were all soldiers and settlers, which, of course, this is the lingo to say they had no right to breathe in and out. So that was Nalita Pandor. That is the government of South Africa. These are the people who are leading this campaign.
She still hasn't said the name
accuse
right.
Israel of genocide. Okay, and Cyril Ramaphosa, who's supposedly the moderate.
Oh, you had it right the second time. Ramaphosa.
Leader of the ANC, who is the president of South Africa. So he condemned the genocide. Well, not the genocide. He didn't call it that. He called it.
Yeah, because it isn't one. Because people who are serious about these things like to get their terminology right, and October 7th wasn't a genocide in intent or in effect.
the death of people, the killing of people on October 7th, but immediately in the next sentence after he said that, he accused Israel of committing genocide.
Yeah, just because Israel had said they wanted to commit genocide on television repeatedly.
And that and the other line that they both have made, and then a couple days later he led a pro Palestinian protest. It's always funny when they call them protests when they're being led by political leaders, but whatever.
But what the fuck?
He led a pro-Palestinian or pro-Palestine protest through the streets of South Africa.
Well, I mean, I believe the reason that's called a protest is because it's protesting against a thing.
So, and wearing a keffiyeh and draped in the Palestinian flag, etc. So this is
He's
an
not draped in it,
extremely
he's carrying
hostile
it.
government. But another aspect of it that we have to recognize is that they say that Israel began its occupation of Palestine not in 1967, like people.
Well, no, because I mean, it obviously it didn't.
Who claim that there's a two-state solution like to say.
Who the hell still? I mean, apart from the Quad, as we saw yesterday, fake human rights activist Emily Schrader seems to think there's a two-state solution someplace. Not that she supports it, but she thinks it exists. Like nobody serious. Like what fucking decade are you from that you're acting like that's something people seriously think is possible?
That all that they're talking about is Israel's control over the Gaza Strip until 2005. Of course, they think that Israel is still in control of Gaza.
Yeah, well, it is because it is. You literally control every single calorie that the people in there get.
Whatever, that Israel's control over Gaza and Israel's control over Judea and Samaria.
Oh, she refuses to say the West Bank. And she refuses to say occupation, too.
And Israel's sovereignty over unified Jerusalem.
Yeah, occupied East Jerusalem. Israel's annexation of Jerusalem.
That all occurred and the after or during the course of the Six-Day War in 1967, that's the occupation. But Tel Aviv, Haifa, Western Jerusalem, Beersheba, other places, that's not occupied territory. That's not what the South Africans say.
No, yeah, because I mean, I don't know if this is true. But if it is true, based because the thing is, the people in Gaza that you're like trying to distract from the fact that you're massacring, they most of them are from. Well, she listed Beersheba, also known as Bersaba. That's what it was known as before it was occupied by colonized by Israel. Was a major Palestinian town in the area. That was, I mean, the Palestinians in Gaza all come from that area.
The South African government's position is that Palestine has been occupied since 1948.
And really, it's been occupied since before that. Because, I mean, the Zionist colony was established before that.
Meaning that, from their perspective, Israel has been carrying out genocide against the Palestinians simply by existing.
No, not simply by existing, but by ethnically cleansing Palestine, by deliberately imposing living conditions designed to to encourage Palestinians either to leave or to just like die.
Israel's existence is an act of genocide. That is the South African position. That's the official position of the South African.
Notice, I mean, she has so many citations here. I would love to see some proof that that is the actual position. But I mean, if it is, I wouldn't push back against it because, yeah, I mean, it is a genocidal regime. It was very explicitly founded that way. I mean, there was all sorts of discussion amongst the Zionists in the early 20th century about the minute they actually acknowledged that there were all these Palestinians there and they were going to have to do something about that. The whole question became, what the hell do we do with them? We obviously can't have them in our colony or, it will dilute the racial character of it.
Government. And one more point we should make about South Africa's behavior since October 7th, which is that they
I guess she's just gonna keep on making points about South Africa's behavior, so we can talk about literally anything but Israel's behavior since October 7th.
for whatever reason, I mean, their hostility towards Israel is long-standing.
Yeah, because as you pointed out, Israel supported the fucking racist regime that tortured and murdered them.
Recalled their ambassador in 2018 from Israel, and then a month after Hamas's invasion of Israel on October 7th, South Africa said that they want to cut off all diplomatic ties with Israel. So this
Yeah, good. I mean, and South Africa is like, I mean, the demand in Ireland also has been to expel the Israeli ambassador since October.
is their response to Hamas's invasion and day of genocide
Day of genocide. Fuck you.
with all of its forms that are delineated in the Genocide Convention.
Okay. You're gonna bring up the Genocide Convention. Show me which things delineated in the Genocide Convention actually apply. Which provisions apply? I mean, you're a fucking military lawyer, Caroline. Let's hear it.
A month later, they're accusing, or really days later, they're accusing Israel of genocide. A month later, they're cutting off diplomatic ties. And
Yeah, you're right. They should have done that sooner.
3 months after October 7th, they're standing before the International Court of Law, trying to get a ruling that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians, so that the international community will come in on behalf of Hamas and on behalf of
Hamas. Like, seriously.
society that supports the genocide of Jews.
Yeah, notice there she did it again. Once again, I mean, she's doing the exact thing, which is to find ways to say that there are no innocents in Gaza, and that therefore it is justifiable to exterminate them. All the while pretending that they're not doing genocide, even though the leadership in Israel have openly said they are.
And destroy Israel or whatever. So this is an act of what they call lawfare on the most basic level. They're using the language.
Lawfare, it's funny what they call lawfare. I mean, lawfare is a term that pro-Israel, often Mossad-linked law firms use to describe shutting down Palestinian solidarity organizations and harassing them with bogus lawsuits.
Language of law to project the crime that's being committed against Israel by the Palestinians onto.
Notice once again, not by Hamas, not by the Qassam brigades, not by terrorists or some shit like that. The Palestinians.
The victims, onto the Jews. And then,
no, nobody's saying the Jews. Most of us aren't in Israel, and a lot of us are very unhappy with what you lot are doing. Actually, you're nothing to do with us. You're your thing. I don't know what the fuck it is. You went over, you set up kosher 4chan as a country, but you don't get to like pretend that what you do reflects on us. We're not that. Like, I mean, and the more like the Jewish community, the majority of Jews who aren't Israeli, find out about what Israel gets up to and what the society is like, the less popular Israel is in the Jewish community.
And use that projected criminality of the culprit onto the victim as a means to achieve Hamas's goal, which is the annihilation of the Jewish state.
There is no Jewish state. I mean, that is actually also an anti-Semitic thing to say, let's just be clear. Because again, it is an attempt to equate Jews with Zionism. And also to see, Zionism denies that Jews have any right to be at home in the countries we're from. The idea, the Zionist idea is that we are foreigners in our homes, and the only place where we have any right to be is in a colony in Palestine. And so That is where, and that is also another anti-Semitic thing about Zionism, and it is another anti-Semitic thing about calling Israel the Jewish state. It is the Zionist state. You can give it that. It is that.
Support of the international community. So that's what we're seeing on the part of South Africa. That's what that's their objective. That's who they are. That's the context in which they act. A
Yeah,
profoundly uh, anti-Israel regime of
I wonder again. I mean, yeah. What's wild about this is that she already admitted that. I mean, the people of South Africa have absolutely no reason to have any affection for Israel because Israel was responsible for torturing and murdering them.
the ANC, pro-Hamas regime of the ANC, pro-genocide of Jewry of the ANC.
That's bullshit. Like there are lots of Jews in South Africa actually. I mean, I haven't heard the ANC doing shit to them.
That doesn't.
In fact, a lot of South African Jews fought against the apartheid regime that Israel likes so much, and are also against apartheid in Palestine.
View it as a crime to kill Jews that refers to Jewish babies who were beheaded and burned alive.
I mean, this is okay. The beheading is a lie. The burned alive is like half of a lie, in that there were people who were burned alive. They were burned alive, it turns out, by Israeli tank shells. Israeli soldiers have admitted it. Survivors of the fighting on the 7th, and 8th, and 9th have also talked about Yasmin Polat, for example. So, I mean, what right now she's like combining a thing that never happened with a thing Israel did.
As settlers or soldiers, in
Well, they
order
are settlers.
to minimize the significance of their annihilation on October 7th or their continued captivity in the hands of Hamas.
By the time she recorded this, Israel had, during their ground operations, rescued exactly one hostage and killed 3. Like, I mean, that's not counting the ones they killed from bombing. It's worth noting they killed like 30 of them. Israel has killed more of these hostages than they rescued.
Um, and here I just want to, I don't know where to put it actually. I have it all laid out
Oh
here.
yeah, why? Who gives a fuck? I mean, you're just sort of pile. It's a gish gallop. Who cares what order you go in?
In my little Word document as I usually do, but it's all so terribly insidious. But now let's just move to the International Court of Justice. So the International Court of Justice sounds like a very hot, a beautiful name for a beautiful organization.
I see. Israel is kind of sour on the ICJ because back about when was the wall advisory appeal? Let me just check that exact date. ICJ Palestine wall appeal. Legal. Yeah. What date was that? Holy shit. Okay, December 8th, 2003. So, like, 20 years and a month ago, the ICJ issued this opinion on the wall. And there are a number of things that came up that are important. Like, if you may have heard people saying, here's the text of the decision, that link that I just dropped in chat, that an occupying power can't claim self-defense against a population they're occupying. Well, the the World Court actually did rule that in 2003 in the advisory opinion on the wall, because Israel's justification for the wall was supposed self-defense, and they said self-defense in international law only applies to threats that come from areas outside of your control. You cannot use the claim of self-defense to justify the use of military force against a population that is in territory that you control.
International Court of Justice. This is the body that you would go to in order to seek justice, right? I mean, like Isaiah or something. So no, it's not. I mean, you could say
Well,
that
I mean, it's not like the Israeli apartheid courts that like have had such wonderful decisions as the time back in like the 1970s. This is cited in Chomsky's Fateful Triangle, so it's a long time ago. Back when Israel was still heavily dependent on cheap semi-enslaved labor from the West Bank, um, they would the Israeli law required Palestinian workers from the West Bank to pay payroll taxes, to pay national insurance contributions. Israeli law also barred Palestinian workers from the West Bank from receiving any benefits that they were paying for. So a bunch of Palestinian workers from the West Bank went to court in Israel and said, either we need to have access to the benefits, or we need our money back. It is unlawful discrimination, you know, for you to be taking this money out of our paychecks and then not letting us have the benefits. And the Supreme Court of Israel ruled that Israel is not the state of its citizens, it is the state of the Jewish people, and therefore it is under no obligation to treat anyone equally, and that the only purpose in collecting national insurance contributions from Palestinian workers was to ensure that they could not compete on price with Jewish workers, and that therefore they had no rights that they could actually claim against the state for this money that was just completely was taken out of their paychecks for benefit to pay for benefits that they don't get. I mean, that's the wonderful court system that, for example, Judge Aharon Barak, who is see what the one of the things the ICJ does is if neither party to a case has a judge from their country on the court already, they can designate a judge. And so South Africa designated one, and Israel designated Aharon Barak, who is the former Chief Justice of the Israeli Supreme Court.
all courts are political because the judges in any court have their political biases that are going to, or political convictions. I mean, you can look at it in a nice way, that are going to inform their judgments. That's, in fact, judges are supposed to be appointed so that because their values, to a certain extent, are going to be reflective of the values of their society. And so their society's trusts them to adjudicate disputes in a fair way towards the members of their society.
Yeah, so what?
And in many countries, certainly in Israel, we've seen this over the past year, there's a polarization, a split between the views of the public and the mores and the values of Zionism and Judaism that inform the vast majority of Israel's people, and the progressive values that inform the vast majority of Israel's justices.
Which is really cute because the thing is, first of all, the idea that the judges in Israel are particularly progressive, they're like progressive by Israeli standards, which means like I mean I believe the term that it has been used for people who are progressive by Israeli standards in the U.S. is alt-light. Basically, I think was the term that was being used for a while. You know, sort of the people who will go to a Charlottesville pogrom but don't necessarily lead their own charge. That's progressive by Israeli standards. And I mean, acting like the public was totally on side with this judicial reform that was mostly designed to ensure that Netanyahu could not be like tried for the numerous cases of corruption he's got pending against him, while at the same time ensuring that there would be no meaningful like judicial review of, I mean there already barely was any, of Israeli laws. Like there were huge protests over that, actually.
Supreme Court, and that clash is what stands behind the clashes that Israel experienced over the past year leading up to the October 7th invasion, where you had people, the public, electing a government that was committed to judicial reform that would see justices appointed to the Supreme Court that were more reflective of the values of the people of Israel.
Then why were the people actually... And now, one thing you should note, when Zionists talk about the people of Israel, they're not talking about the population of Israel. They're not talking about the Jewish population of Israel either. They're talking about all Jews everywhere. Except that most of us don't get a say in any of this shit. They just kind of pretend we're along for the ride. And of course, like, the Palestinian population, like, which is, like, if we just count the ones who have Israeli passports, that's 20% of the population. They don't rate at all.
Than the current batch of justices are. And the justices and their progressive supporters and Israel's elites that don't wish to have the court reflect the values of the nation of Israel. So you see that as well in the United States with all of the clashes between the people and the Supreme Court. You see it in places like Britain, where you have clashes between British nationalists and the British courts that are supposed to be, that were, at least until Britain left the EU, supposed to be adjudicating issues of national significance on the basis of European statutes.
Yeah, and she's wrong about that. There are a whole bunch of European treaties that still apply in Britain that are completely independent of membership in the EU. Like the European Convention on Human Rights and stuff like that. The Tories have been trying to get rid of it for a while. So far, it has not succeeded.
And the post-nationalist values of the European Union. So you see these clashes all over the place. So if you take that as a basis sort of saying, well, all courts are political in one way or another because they're run by justices, and then you take the International Court of Justice. So what is the standard rod that informs the vast majority of the international community, so-called, right? So,
well, I mean, who do you mean? Like, usually when U.S. or U.S. client states talk about the international community, they mean like 5 countries.
You would think, what are the universal values, the morals that would be informing such an august body that refers to itself as the International Court of Justice? Well, you would think about human rights, you would think about equality under the law, you would think about...
And yes, all of those things are in there because they, like, the international law that they are actually ruling under includes things like the International Covenant on Civil Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and numerous other, UN conventions and multilateral treaties and stuff like that.
The right to life. You would think about all kinds of things, but really what we found is that the United Nations, which is supposed to be the repository of the will of humanity because all nations of the world are members of that, you find that it has long been a reflection of the prejudices of the regimes in governments around the world.
Yeah, which is why, like, Israel's representatives to the UN managed to, like, set new standards for bad taste when they decided to go up and defend the genocide that their government was carrying out while wearing yellow, like, stars, imitations of the ones the Nazis were required Jews to wear. And then if that weren't enough, then they put the words "never again" on them. Like, I mean, so you really can't say that Israel was poorly represented. That seems, judging from what we've seen on Israeli social media during this genocide and the polling. Yeah, I mean, the states are not moral actors. States aren't humans. They are institutions.
And the lowest common denominator that you find reflected in UN General Assembly resolutions from the UN Human Rights Committee, and other UN bodies is that the thing that everybody seems to be able to, not everybody, the vast majority of the member nations of the UN are able to rally together on behalf of, is the rejection of the basic rights accorded to every human being on earth by international law to Jews.
That's what she means by that like, impressive fucking lie, is that when Israel violates international law, which Israel does all the fucking time, these bodies will often point that out. They don't do anything about it because the Security Council ensures that they can't do anything about it. But they point it out, and Israel doesn't like that they point it out because Israel would prefer to violate international law without anyone pointing out that they're doing that.
Particularly to Jews who live in Israel. So what you see is that Israel is condemned in the UN Human Rights Committee more than all of the rogue state actors are together, right?
Wait, what rogue state actors though? I mean, that's a random. Somebody might say that Israel is a rogue state actor. For example, what the fuck are the rogue state actors?
More condemnations on an annual basis in the UN Human Rights Committee against Israel than there are against, Iran, Syria, Libya, China, Russia. You name it, whatever rogue regime you can think of.
Yeah, so rogue means people the U.S. don't like. And it's funny to hear her calling Russia a rogue regime when Israel actually has fairly friendly ties with Russia, and Russia has been very pro-apartheid, very anti-Palestinian.
All of the condemnations against them, North Korea, they're, at most one, maybe two, and Israel's like 20, and that's
I wonder if that's something
to
do with the fact that Israel is violating the Geneva Conventions on the daily.
People to get consensus around something, the main thing that they can get consensus around is condemning the Jewish state.
Yeah, right. Again, with the anti-Semitism there, it's not a Jewish state. It is the state of the Zionist movement. But I wonder if the reason has something to do with the fact that there are specific provisions of international law that Israel just systematically violates. Like, the Israeli courts have come up with a whole tortured argument to explain why the Fourth Geneva Convention, which applies to the rights of the duties of occupying powers and the rights of civilians in occupied populations, why the Fourth Geneva Convention does not apply to Israel and to Israel alone.
And saying and demonizing the Jews and the Jewish state and saying that we don't have a right to exist.
No. It's specifically Israel that they're talking about. Stop wiping your shit off on us.
And that's why you would expect, given the nature of...
She's so fucking whiny, too. She has this just fucking whiny-ass voice. It's, really, it grates like a motherfucker.
That lowest common denominator, always coming together against the one nation that isn't a member of any bloc, right?
Yeah, Israel isn't a member of... Yeah, Israel is so fucking non-aligned. Literally, if the U.S... They're literally completely dependent on the United States. If the U.S. The U.S... And Israel is, the only country that backs up the U.S. on things like, the illegal blockade of Cuba. Every year there's a resolution in the General Assembly to condemn the illegal U.S. blockade of Cuba, and the only country that regularly reliably will back the U.S. on that is Israel. Israel is so fucking non-aligned. That's what everybody knows about Israel. They don't have a bloc. They're not in a gang. Except for the U.S.
In the UN, that would be reflected as well in the International Court of Justice, because the UN is not an international humanitarian organization. It's a political organization. It's comprised of political entities called states, and it has political interests as an institution to expand its power. The same is the case with the International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice is an inherently political body that reflects...
we're 20 minutes into this, and she hasn't said an actual single thing about South Africa's submissions to the ICJ. Because they went into a huge amount of detail. It was 3 hours of oral argument. 5 different barristers went up and advocates, they don't call them barristers in South Africa, they're called advocates apparently, went up and gave lengthy presentations, including some of the leading human rights barristers in the fucking world. What I'm getting, we're halfway through this thing. I'm guessing the whole idea of this is to avoid ever talking about that stuff. Because one thing about JNS is that they really don't want to talk about Gaza. Not really. To the extent that they pretend that the protests against the genocide there are, like, against Christmas and shit, they know that the minute they start to get into what goes on in Gaza, they're going to lose people because it is just absolutely unconscionable. And even a lot of the ghoulish reactionary assholes who will, like, tune into somebody who's an alumna of fucking Breitbart will eventually be sickened. But with that, it is time to call it a night. Once again, thank you to everyone for joining in. It's always lovely to see you. I hope you enjoy the stream. And I, look forward to keeping in touch with you in between streams on the Discord. I will be back Friday night at 11:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time to continue the Last JabroniCon. And if you have suggestions, ideas, anything like that, check me in the Discord or drop a comment on the YouTube page, which, if you're watching this, you don't need the link to that because you're already on it. But anyway, have a good night.